Today, we're going to be looking at some of your spicy K-pop hot takes. I actually left a post a few days ago on the community tab where I asked you guys to leave your hot takes, and after waiting a little bit, I've collected all of your comments. So if you're one of the lucky few that did leave a reply, I thoroughly appreciate it because it makes the video more fun that way. I plan on doing something like that again in the future where I just ask you like a question and then turn it into a video. So if you see that again in the future, feel free to leave your responses. But with that being said, let's get started with some hot takes. All right, our first hot take comes from Josh, who says, Twice is the only third gen girl group that really loves working as a group, that really enjoy it. I don't know if I fully agree with this because I think they're probably one of the only few third gen girl groups left that is active. So in that regard, I would agree that yes, out of all the active third gen girl groups, they're probably the one that enjoys working together the most. But I think all time, it's hard to say. I think that there are a ton of groups that maybe aren't as active as much, or maybe that they disbanded from the third generation that genuinely had a great bond with each other, but other factors led to them either splitting up or disbanding or whatever it is. I would argue that most groups probably enjoy working with each other, but it's a job at the end of the day, so it's not going to always be perfect. There's going to be disagreements, there's going to be drama behind the scenes. Even Twice themselves, I don't know if like every moment of their career has been exactly perfect behind the scenes, but I think out of the girl groups that are left from the third generation, they're probably the prime example of a good business and personal relationship. So yeah, I partially agree, but that's why it's a hot take, All right, our next hot take comes from Asbury Ruby Jane, who says, BTS, Twice, and Blackpink are the only big three in K-pop. There is no such thing as the big three in every generation. Big three in K-pop became such a thing only because of those three and no one else. I have to agree, because I feel like there is never going to be another group that catches up to the level of success, the numbers, the accolades that these big three groups managed to achieve. I mean, think about it this way, right? 1 billion views on a music video? We'll never see those numbers ever again. Like, these days, it's hard to cross 100 million, let alone like 1 billion. Do you know how insane it is to cross 1 billion views? So yeah, I don't know. I think that there have been a lot of groups that have come close, like Stray Kids, probably the biggest boy group that we've had since BTS. And then obviously New Jeans. I think if New Jeans wasn't sabotaged, they would have been the only ones to sit at that table, that big three table. They would have been the only ones to cross over and turn it into the big four. But I think the biggest problem is that BTS, Blackpink, and Twice, they're still active. They're still releasing music. They're still breaking records. So until they disband, we can't even begin to have another big three conversation, because that original big three, they're still here. They're still the best that exists even in the 5th gen. They were the best in 3rd gen. They were the best in 4th gen, and they're still the best now. So we have to wait and see what happens, but it's very hard to see anyone else catching up to them, honestly. All right, the next hot take comes from Fear Not 77, who says, I think of Twice's Japanese discography as superior to the Korean releases, and it makes me sad to see how underappreciated the Japanese hits are, like BDZ. I disagree. I'm going to be honest with you. I disagree. I do think that there are some quality songs in Twice's Japanese discography, but I would not say that it's better, especially because like even if we take the BDZ album specifically, I think an album like that, it just doesn't really age well, at least for me, and it's too all over the place. They've definitely gotten better over time, especially with like Dive, for example. That's a really, really strong, very cohesive sounding album. And this next upcoming album, Enemy, does seem to be going in a cohesive and fun direction as well. So we might be getting some bangers, but I think historically overall, I've definitely enjoyed the Japanese releases a lot less. But there are bangers. I agree. There are definitely some bangers. Better is one of my favorite Twice songs, and that's a Japanese release. Breakthrough, that's another good one. So there's some quality there, but like BDZ, for example, since you brought up BDZ, I personally don't even consider that a hit. I think it's like quirky, and I think it's fun to listen to and go back to, just to be like, oh, this is the Japanese single that they had back then. But I don't know if I would say it's better, especially after hearing something like This Is For and like a Formula of Love album, even with Youth. There's so much better stuff in the Korean releases, from what I've experienced. But I do agree, some Japanese stuff is underappreciated, 100%. All right, our next comment comes from Dean, who says, Blackpink isn't mismanaged. The lack of their discography is simply because they can only pull off a certain sound, and having more music would only expose this. I actually disagree with this, because based on their solo work, we can definitely see that they're able to pull off different genres and styles. I think the problem here is that YG doesn't let them do that on actual Blackpink comebacks. If the members themselves had more agency in the type of music that they put out, I definitely think that we would see more creativity and versatility in the sound. But YG very clearly has like one specific goal, and they want the group to be perceived in one specific way, and that includes giving them less comebacks, because then I guess it makes them more desirable. I don't really understand that strategy, but I mean, clearly something worked, because they wouldn't be as popular if it weren't for that strategy. So yeah, I do think that Blackpink could potentially make really, really cool and really creative songs, but yeah, I don't know. It is partly mismanagement and partly just complacency, I think. All right, our next hot take comes from Fast Fang. They actually left a very long post with 3 different hot takes, so I'm going to condense all 3 of them, and then talk about all of them in one go. But the first one is that nowadays I believe that unhealthy diets are actually stemmed from the societal pressure, not just because companies are evil. The second one is line distributions actually don't matter. And then the third one is I feel like some people can confuse actual mistreatment versus alleged mistreatment. Okay, so for the first one, I would say that I think it's a little bit of both with unhealthy diets. I think that yes, especially in Asia, there is a big societal pressure to be skinny, to have lighter skin, etc., etc. But I think that a lot of it does also come from the company. There have been many examples of idols being told that they have to lose a certain amount of weight before the next evaluation. Like Momo from Twice, that's a great example. She was told like, hey, this is the weight that we want you to be for the next evaluation. And for her to get to that weight, she was eating ice cubes for like a week straight. She almost died. So I do think that yes, it is societal pressure, but some companies are definitely evil, 100%. Some companies take that pressure way too far and then push these idols to some crazy extremes. So I think it's both, right? It's definitely both. The second thing was line distributions don't matter. I agree, 100%. I think a lot of the times when fans complain about line distributions, it's always ridiculous, because it doesn't always mean that the company is ignoring that member or that they're mistreating that member. I think a lot of the times it's just dependent on the type of song. Some songs are going to be more vocal heavy, and therefore you're just going to have more lines from the vocalists. And other songs, you know, they're going to have a rap, so you're going to get more lines from the rappers. Or, you know, other songs are just going to be more instrumental focused, so you're just not going to get lines from almost anybody. But with big groups, it's the balance between how many lines you give one member versus the other. It's always going to be tough. Up until very recently, Momo was one of the members that never got any lines, and then all of a sudden she's getting some pretty significant moments in a lot of the Twice songs. So that changes, you know. I think some companies do take that feedback into consideration, but again, I feel like it's crazy that some fans take it overboard. Like with Mina, I remember with This Is For, when the music video came out, people were saying, oh, she doesn't really have that many lines in the music video. And then they sent trucks to complain in front of the JYP building, which is insane. Like, by the way, I know this has nothing to do with his hot take, but here's my hot take. The trucks, they need to stop. I don't know who started that, but you need to stop sending trucks to complain about every little issue, because you have to pay for these trucks. They're not even free. If they were free, I'd be like, ah, yeah, whatever, you know, but they're not even free. They're like $2,000 per day to send these trucks out there and, you know, shine the banner. Oh, please take care of our not Mina member or whatever. It's ridiculous. Please stop the trucks. And the third one was about mismanagement versus mistreatment. I do think that there is a difference. Sometimes fans use the terms interchangeably, but I do think that there is a difference, right? Like mismanagement could be like a simple thing like not sending the idols on enough variety shows or music shows, or maybe like bad outfit choices, etc., etc. But when I think we talk about mistreatment, I think of like very serious situations, like emotional, physical, even. So yeah, I think sometimes fans do take the word mistreatment very loosely and apply it to things that don't actually constitute as mistreatment. All right, our next hot take comes from Chu, who says, a lot of K-pop companies and groups are too fixated on grabbing the global or Western attention. They're starting to lose what makes them special. I agree, but I feel like this is an inevitable thing, right? A lot more money is in the West. A lot more success is in the West. So these K-pop companies, they have to fixate on that market. Yeah, I think that there's so much more at play here. I don't think it's necessarily that they just are trying to lose their identity on purpose. I think K-pop as a genre in general has always followed American trends. They've never really done their own thing. Like maybe second gen is the only time where I can think of where like it felt unique, but you trace it as far back as you can, and it's always been following whatever was popular in America and then adapting it to their own thing. So if America shifts in one way, K-pop will always shift in that way as well, and it always will feel like they're focusing on the West. But I mean, that's just, it has to be that way no matter what. All right, our next hot take comes from Serene, who says, Twice's best album remains to be Formula of Love. This Is For hasn't topped it. Wow, that is spicy. I am genuinely curious to see what you guys think. Which one is the better album? This Is For or Formula of Love? Because I feel like for the longest time, Formula of Love was seen as like the peak of peak, right? At one point, it was the highest rated album in history. That isn't the case anymore. I think there was another album that beat it recently. But I mean, for girl groups, that was such a big achievement, and it's a great album. Some great B-sides, some of the best B-sides that Twice has ever put out. But I'm going to be honest with you. I think if anything were to beat that album, it has to be This Is For. The 4-track run of Peach Gelato, Mars, Options, Right Hand Girl, like that back to back, that's undefeated. Plus, I would argue that the subunit tracks on This Is For are actually better than the subunit tracks on Formula of Love. So yeah, I don't know. That is an interesting conversation. Let me know what you guys think. Where do you weigh on in that argument? Formula of Love or This Is For? All right, our last hot take comes from Andatori, who says, I think the 4th gen and 5th gen fandom is weird and lose touch of what makes K-pop fun. They are so absorbed in the numbers and accolades aspect of K-pop. 100%. Numbers in general, I don't know what it is, but people get so fixated on the numbers these days. It's like, if your song isn't hitting this many streams, or your album isn't doing this many sales, or whatever, they consider it a flop. People need to stop being fixated on the numbers, because if you want to know the truth, if you want to know the crazy truth, a lot of those numbers, they're fake. They're fake anyway. YouTube views do not equate success. A lot of the time, those YouTube views are botted. They are botted. 300 million in these times, that there's no way. I've seen like 4th gen and 5th gen groups reach like 300 million. But they can't sell out as many seats as like a 3rd gen group. How does that make sense? Something's off. The math does not make sense. And you know why? It's because they're paying for views. Same thing with Spotify. You can't trust streaming numbers. We know this. You know this. It's super easy for you to pay for views. Even Billboard isn't real. When a group goes on Billboard top 10 or whatever, a lot of the times you can just pay to get there, man. The paths to success for these groups is way easier than it was in the past. So you got to understand that numbers aren't everything, accolades aren't everything. I think what matters the most is whether the music is good and whether you enjoy the music, whether you enjoy listening and being a part of the fandom of that group. If that's the case, all the extra stuff does not matter. So that's what I would say. That's my advice to the 4th gen and 5th gen fans and the fandoms. Please stop being fixated on the numbers. All right, and before we go, I'm gonna give you guys my hot take, which I've said in the past, so I don't even know if it's a hot take anymore, but I'm gonna tell it to you anyway. My hot take is that boy group music sucks. It just sucks. I'm gonna be honest with you. I have tried. I've given it a fair chance. I've tried to listen to different groups from different companies. They all suck. Half of it is either really boring music, and the other half of it is just loud. Like listening to Stray Kids sounds like what a lobotomy would feel like. Like it's so hard. I've tried. I really have. And don't get me wrong, there are some Stray Kids songs that I do enjoy, right? Same thing with ATs. I've heard a few songs here and there where I'm like, okay, that's kind of nice. That's a nice little tune. But then they always pair that with other songs that are just like impossible. It feels like I have dementia. My favorite boy group song that has released in the last 3 years is Standing Next to You by Jungkook. That was the only one that I was like, yo, you know what? I want to add that to my playlist. I want to listen to it every single day. If more boy groups release music that sounded like that, I would be more willing to listen to them. But they don't. Their music is so loud and obnoxious. I don't get it. I don't understand it, man. It's so hard to listen to, especially the male rappers. The male rappers, oh my god, the male rappers, they suck. They absolutely suck. Maybe it's just like Korean as a language is just hard to make good raps out of. I don't know what it is, but half the time they're not even saying anything in the raps. It's just a bunch of nonsense, man. Anyways, with that being said, that is gonna do it for the video. Let me know if you guys disagree or agree with some of the hot takes down in the comments below. Feel free to leave any more hot takes that you may have that weren't covered in the video, and leave some recommendations on actual good boy group songs. I would love to hear some of them. But with that being said, thank you for watching, take care, and I'll see you guys next time.